Okay, so for our group, our discussion question was to examine the landmark case of the Brown versus Board of Education. So we're going to gotta just talk about the main points of the case, and then why did they readdress these points in the Brown versus Board of Education. So in the original Brown versus Board of Education, this was a huge milestone basically for our country. This is when the Supreme Court ruled that, separating children in public schools based on their race was considered unconstitutional. So then that kind of led to, ending that and legalized racial segregation in the schools in the US. So I guess a good point to bring up too is the Plessy versus Ferguson case. So when that initially happened in 1896, so prior to this, when when this African American had gotten onto a all white coach basically and was arrested for doing that, he basically fought that, and saying that it's a violation of the 14th Amendment. And it was ruled that, basically that was okay. And he, it was considered fine. But then once the Brown versus Board came about, that kind of paved the way for desegregation, basically. Yeah, do you guys have anything else you want to add to that, I guess?
Mm-mm.
Anybody else? And then we can kind of go into like the Brown versus Board of Education, the second round. So basically with the first go around with Board versus Education, they obviously ruled schools needed to, desegregate. However, there was no I guess framework for that or way to implement it. So there was no time frame, there was no way to go about that, so there was no direction. So that kind of led into the Brown versus 2, which was in 1955. So then, yeah, I don't know if you guys want to kind of touch on that or your thoughts on any of that.
What I think a lot of it, like you were saying with Brown versus 1, that whole idea of good faith, and reasonable. I think the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court left it to the district courts and said, do this. And it's pretty clear what we want done and you want it done quickly. But, anytime you dump something that vague on a wide group of people, it's going to happen at different rates, different paces, and in different ways. And like you said, they came back for Brown 2 because they didn't think it was happening fast enough or efficiently enough. And something when we discussed the chapter you brought up too was the I can't remember what you called, was it the de facto, Adam, where they were some places were still enacting policies, doing things that may cause segregation almost covertly, even though it wasn't direct. And so maybe that's part of the reason why they were addressing it again as well.
Yeah.
What else do we have to say about Brown?
I guess I can talk about Brown 3 a little bit because 2 times wasn't enough. So then we had to get to a third Brown. This time the court said that they must assess whether the school district has done enough in good faith to desegregate. If a district is intentionally segregating, whether it's de jure or de facto, then the burden of proof is on the district to show that they've eliminated every single vestige of segregation as they possibly could to its fullest possible extent. And then once the school district showed that effective result, moving from segregation to desegregation, then it would be able to be under or no longer supervised by the courts to make sure that they are being desegregated. And that's pretty much all Brown 3 said.
Yeah. So I feel like even though schools and, cities, so like if you look at Omaha, for example, like there's still segregation in Omaha. So like North Omaha, South Omaha, West Omaha, there's still major segregation in Omaha. And I know that like a lot of our kids, when we teach this, they're like, no, segregation's not a thing anymore. I'm sitting next to, a Hispanic kid in my class or this. And so we have to remember when we're teaching it to, be empathetic, because a lot of, people don't feel comfortable going into certain parts of Omaha because of the surrounding, this is North Omaha. So I know, like, growing up, I grew up in a very, like I said, a very primary white community. There's 900 people in our community, and there's absolutely no other races in our community. So going into North Omaha, mom and dad said, lock the doors, and that was just how we grew up. And so then when I taught at Boys Town for 7 years, and it just completely opened my eyes to, no, that's not how we need to live. We don't need to be living in fear of other races. So just, teaching, especially like teaching in my classes, I make sure that I teach about different races and getting them, acquainted with other races and other ethnicities, so that they don't grow up the way that, I did, where it was lock your doors, or, be careful when you go to this part of Omaha. Like, you can get hurt just as hurt in West Omaha as you can in North Omaha. So just kind of, and also like teaching our kids that too, not to be scared of going to certain parts of Omaha, but being aware of your surroundings anywhere you go. So I think that, segregation is still, it's, as much as it's not as serious as it was before, it's still a problem. And even in schools, going away from race, like, you would never let, 100-pound, 5-foot kid on your football team. If you're going to have tryouts, you're going to look at that kid's demeanor and you're going to be like, you're going to do nothing for us on the football team. So that's kind of a different, and also like girls playing football is becoming more popular now. But like when we were in high school, no girl would think of being on the football team like they are now. So I think there's different segregation, not just race, that is still going on, that we have to be able to teach about and just be aware about.
Yeah, I do feel like we've come a long way. And it's crazy to me to think back that we, Brown versus Board 1, 2, and 3, and kind of what we all had to go through, I guess, for it to even be a starting point or a conversation. Like a starting point to where we are now. But yeah, I think you're exactly right, Taylor. It's happening in more ways than one. The difference is now we're just more educated, and are teaching our kids a little bit differently, whether, than when we grew up. It was just, this is what we do and we don't talk about it. This is just the way that we're going to do it. And there was no teaching or talking about it. So
this is just the way it is.
Yeah, that's just the way it is. You see a person of this color and this is what you do. I feel like now we're just doing more teaching. It's more of a conversation. It is in schools. We do talk about it more, especially like at our school. Like I said, it's pretty much it's all a white community. We do have some ELL students, but our kids just don't. They go to Lincoln, obviously, but it's just not something they see. So when they see it in books or video, that's pretty much their exposure. A lot of that we're just due to where we live. So yeah.
I think it's a little bit too the difference between segregation and diversity. Like, we're also predominantly a white community. We're not segregated, meaning we don't mandate that white people go to school here, but it's just the diversity of the area, So I think there's maybe, Taylor, kind of what you were talking about with Omaha too, is almost systemic segregation, where it's not intentional, but it's based on the, availability of transportation, economic diversity, geographic diversity, stuff like that. And so that's part of in good faith, are we doing everything we can to make every option available to these students?
Yep.
All right. Anything else, guys?
Nope.
All right.
I think that's good.
Thank you much.